Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Darth Tyrax Presents. I'm Darth Tyrax, and in this episode, we're going to discuss the franchise of Macross. Now, Macross has been around for quite some time, dating back almost about 40 years now, 1982, when the first series came out. It's a Japanese anime series that begins with the original series in which a alien ship crashes on Earth and eventually causes the Earth to unify. And they reverse engineer the ship. They rebuild the ship. All these new technologies allow them to create new things like three form fighters that have a robot hybrid in fighter mode, combat mecha, which are basically walking tanks, and other starships. It basically allowed humanity to take a leap forward in technology. And that series starts off with the Zentradi invading. The Zentradi are trying to track down this alien ship, thus creating Space War One. So that series is what launches everything. There's a number of iconic things out of it. The transforming ship with the massive cannon, the transformable space fighters, just the big battle fleets and the whole alien invasion, which is a pretty standard trope. But underlying all of that is culture and music are really what kind of win the day, because the Zentradi are a military race. They're all clones essentially, even the females, but they're all segregated. They have no culture. They don't know about music or TV or anything like that. And it's so foreign to them that it throws them off. And that's what helps allow humanity and the Earth to defeat them. Now, at the time, they did a movie that kind of retells the story in a shorter format, but by and large, that was kind of the end of it for the better part of a decade until somebody made a sequel. And they've had a number of sequels. The first sequel, however, was actually considered an alternate timeline once more sequels started coming out. This is the cover of the movie, but if you can see there, that's pretty standard design for them. The sequel that did come out, the first sequel to come out, was called Macross 2. As you can see there, and again, you see the fighter and stuff in there, which is another one of these fleets arrives looking to invade, and they are descendants of the Zentradi, or at least an offshoot anyway. But it was an alternate reality. A few years after that, though, my personal favorite sequel series called Macross Plus, which was a mini series, was done similar to as if they were following a fighter competition, similar to the YF-22 and the YF-23 that the U.S. was doing at the time. So it's set around this competition of the new fighter, and there's a love triangle, which is pretty standard fare in this franchise. Music isn't quite as big a part, but it does play a pivotal role in the end, and as does artificial intelligence. And it's actually a really good story, which they did retell in a movie format. They took a lot out from the miniseries, and I prefer the miniseries because there's just so much more in-depth material there. The movie's good too, mind you, but yeah, they took a lot of character development stuff out of that. And it's action-packed, character development's great, the story's really good, but that's pretty standard fare for Macross. Now, about the same time, they did a series called Macross 7. I will say that's probably my least favorite, and it's roughly the same time frame. I think it's set a few years later, but I couldn't like the series. There were some neat elements to it, some nice mecha, especially fighters, but by and large, it was just so over the top with the way the music was used. And music is an underlying trope in the entire franchise. Like, it has a lot of power over a variety of things. But in this series, it was just to the nth degree, and you could tell the animation quality wasn't the same kind of production values. The hero, I don't want to say this, but the hero, I would have preferred to take him into an alley and just beat the crap out of him, because he was a terrible hero. But in the end, like you see a couple of characters that are from the original series, but they're older because it's about 40 years, 30, 35, 40 years later. And they're in an immigration fleet because Earth humanity has decided to go amongst the stars, and they're colonizing, and they have these colony fleets, and this series centers around one of the colony fleets. And in the end, obviously the heroes win the day. A little while later, they came out with another series called Macross Zero. Macross Zero is kind of a prequel series. It takes place prior to the original TV series from 1982, during what was called the anti-unification wars. Basically, we ended up having a global civil war in which some countries did not want to be under a unified umbrella or government. And it's they're having a war, and it takes place. That's basically finishing the end of the war is what happens in this series, and they find some other alien artifacts and things that predate even the ship's crash that nobody even knew about. Again, the animation quality top notch. Usually the mini series have higher production values because they're like 6 to 8, 4 to 6 to 8 episodes or so. It was actually pretty good. There's some really oddball elements to it, but otherwise it was actually a pretty good story. Now, a little bit later, 25th anniversary, I believe, they came out with a series called Macross Frontier. Again, music plays a pivotal role. This series was also kind of cribbed and paid homage to the original series, including character designs which were similar to the originals. There was a Skull Squadron, which was the main squadron in the old series. The ships are very similar. I'm not sure what else to tell you. It's basically meant to be an homage, right? So the series is 25 episodes. They encounter an alien species, which actually ends up being very important to even items that happened in the past. And again, music combined with some other elements are really important here. You get to see more Zentradi because more and more Zentradi are basically allying themselves with what becomes the unified galactic government, essentially, and these various colony fleets. And you see some of that. You get to see full-sized and micronized Zentradi, because the other thing with Zentradi were they were giants. They were about 30 feet tall. So, but they could have their size manipulated through technology. One of the funniest scenes in Macross Frontier is there's a farming ship, and on there is a full-size Zentradi, and he's carrying around what looks like a crossbreed of a hippo and a cow that would be massive to us, but he just has it like tucked under his arm like a puppy, and it's actually pretty funny. Another neat thing in this series is you see a full-size female Zentradi who wears an armor pack meant for Mecha. Why? Because she's about the same size. And that's pretty badass in my opinion. But in the end, again, this series ends up figuring out what they need to do, and our heroes end up winning the day at the end of it. Again, a few years later, the latest series, which I haven't watched yet, I will not watch straight through, called Macross Delta. And again, music is pivotal, and it actually helps deal with some kind of space virus or something. I can't remember exactly what it was called. But again, awesome mecha, awesome combat scenes. A little bit of magic-like stuff, which it takes a bit of getting used to because it's not something we've seen in the other series. But by and large, the animation quality is top-notch. Same thing with Macross Frontier. Animation quality was top-notch. The mecha designs are top-notch. And overall, the stories themselves, there isn't really a love triangle story in this one, but there is a lot of relationship stuff going on, and that's the other side of it. Like the different characters have different relationships, and the story is pretty well told. From what I've seen, I've only seen about half of it at this point. But yeah, throughout all of these, you have your transformable mecha in all the series, and they actually show a progression from the original VF1. They show its predecessor, what was more of a pre-production interim, the VF0, the VF4, the VF11, and they make their way through. And by the time we get to Macross Delta, we're up to the VF31. and it's like sixth generation at that point. And you can tell each generation is better than the last, and it's this, and it's like looking at generation of real life fighters in that regard. And the main person behind the franchise, Shoji Kawamori, um, he was an aircraft enthusiast. It's one of the reasons the original fighter looked a lot like an F-14. Why the YF-19 looked like, I think it was the Su-37. Why the YF-21 looked like the YF-23. And he took inspiration from real life designs, and it was just it's a fun series to watch in that regard. Now, that all said, I would be remiss if I did not include something many Macross people can't stand, and that is Robotech. Robotech came out in 1984, I believe it was, and it was an amalgamation of three different series: the original SDF Macross, another series called Southern Cross, and a third series called Mas Pieta. And the person who brought it over at the time, because at the time Japanese animation wasn't a big thing in North America, basically he didn't rewrite a lot for the Macross series. That kept pretty close to what it was, but he had to rewrite significant portions of the middle series, Southern Cross, and tweak some of the third series, Mas Pieta. And it turned it into three generations of the same story. Now it's dated. I always enjoyed it, but after being exposed to all the Macross, it's a little more difficult to watch because it's just the quality's not the same, nor are many of the mechanical designs by comparison. But in overall, it's an enjoyable series, and it's I haven't watched in a while, but it's something I've always enjoyed, and it tries to distance itself. It doesn't do a very good job by and large, but I put that more on the people who own the rights to it at Harmony Gold for that. But they, at a time where you couldn't get things here, what do you do, right? And it's 1984. Macross doesn't come over here without them doing what they do. And then later on, we get the other series slowly but surely now filtering their way over because finally some agreements have been made. But by and large, in some ways, if it wasn't for Robotech, many people in North America wouldn't even know what Macross is. But it is derided and looked down upon by most of the Macross fandom, and I understand why, because it's not Macross, and the quality's just not there, and they've never really done anything with it since except keep re-releasing it on DVD or Blu-ray or whatever the case may be. So it's unfortunate because it probably had some potential, and that potential was literally pissed away. But that's about it for this. They did have comics, and there's some other stuff. In Japan, there's a whole crap ton of material published in books and magazines and everything else, because over there, Macross is huge. Macross is probably near on par with Gundam and Space Battleship Yamato in Japan, because that was their like big properties, and they treat it so much differently over there with anime than we treat it here. Well, not myself, but in general. Anime over here is basically looked at like cartoons, where over there they treat it much like North America treats regular live action television. It's just another format. They have movies come out all the time, various series, and it's treated seriously, where in North America it's not. So which is unfortunate. But that's basically my presentation of the Macross series. It's a really good series. If you like mecha, it's a good series to get into. Like I said, Macross 7s, and it's got some elements. It's probably about 20 episodes longer than it should have been. But it's got some neat elements and some neat mecha to it, and some other stuff. And it introduces you to the colony fleets, which have their own kind of uniqueness in that of what they are. And then, of course, the story of Frontier is really good, following through that little love triangle deal and how it's paying homage to the original series. The original series is actually really neat and is coming of age for a couple of characters as well. But by and large, it's a great franchise. I'd probably list it as my second or third favorite franchise, mind you, far behind Star Wars, which is my favorite. but it's generally enjoyable. Yeah, it's like anything else. There's bits and pieces you'll go, I don't know, but by and large, it's actually a really good series. So that's it for this episode, and I hope you guys get a chance to watch it if you haven't. When you do, by all means, leave some comments, and we'll catch you next time. Cheers.